sort of penultimate session before Luciano and I are going to have a little bit of a chat and maybe a little bit of a reflection on the day. But we're sort of returning in this session to one of the themes that we talked about right early this morning, and the emergence of these large language learning models that we've really seen sort of kind of come to the fore over the last year or so. The enormous kind of hype, I think, as one of our speakers kind of referred to it this morning, around these technologies. The fact that these sort of general purpose AI tools seem to be so potentially transformational and potentially disruptive in all sorts of different ways, but also the fact that they appear to provide such incredible kind of potential productivity enhancements if we get them right. But then, of course, guess what? There's a whole load of and a whole list of ethical questions that quickly kind of come to mind when we start to think through some of their implications and have these ethical questions been thought through by the developers or not, I think is a kind of fundamental question for us all. So I think that's kind of what we were planning to talk about in this session, and ultimately, what is the potential of these new AI tools, and how close are they getting, in fact, to replicating and perhaps even surpassing elements of human behavior and human intelligence. Well, I'm glad I'm not answering all those questions, but we do have a great panel who are going to share their thoughts with us. We have Hitan Shah, who is Chief Executive of the British Academy and a long-term stalwart of these pastures in terms of, I think you've been involved in pretty much every digital ethics summit we've run. Ivana Bartoletti, who's Global Data Privacy Officer for Wipro. And then I'm very glad that on screen we have Professor Beth Singler, who is Professor of Digital Religions at University of Zurich, and Dr. Adrian Weller, who's Program Director for AI at the Alan Turing Institute. And thank you both for joining us online. I wanted to kind of open this up to sort of fairly free-flowing conversation. And Hitan, how are you interpreting the sort of developments that we've seen? Are you excited? Are you bemused? Are you and what's your kind of level of confidence in the way some of these technologies are being developed?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think, like everyone else, I spent the last weekend playing with chatbots and being amused at. I mean, there was particularly the one you may have seen where it was asked to do a verse in the style of the Bible about why you shouldn't put peanut butter sandwiches in the VCR. I mean, that if you've not seen that one, it's outstanding. But has this really taken the human race forward? I ask myself, I suppose. Exactly. And I suppose as a side note, just to do justice to the title of this panel, which was, Are We Obsessed with Sentience? I don't think we are, actually. I mean, I don't think anyone's been saying that, hey, this was a sentient being talking about why you shouldn't put your peanut butter sandwich in the VCR. So I think that is a bit of a red herring, and I think this conference has always been quite good at not slipping down that road. The tech is really evolving at a kind of extraordinary rate, isn't it? I mean, compared to sort of 2-3 years ago, and not just in the language models, but on the art side as well. So the kind of DALL-E 2 models, etc. What you can get back is amazing. It's raising also, I mean, as you know, the British Academy is the National Academy for Humanities and Social Sciences, raising all sorts of interesting philosophical questions. What's the nature of art? Where does creativity come from? What's the barrier? What's the sort of relationship between all the kind of historical stuff that was fed into these models? Some of you will be interested in the consent that was behind it too. But what does it now mean to be a creator if actually all you need to do is put in a prompt? And in fact, I think just a few weeks ago, there was, I think the Colorado State Art Fair awarded an AI-created digital artwork there award for best digital art. And there was quite a lot of controversy around that. So how will the norms shift? But of course, there's a very long, rich tradition of people like Duchamp and Warhol who were always challenging this notion of what was good art. I remember for my philosophy finals, I had to write an essay on could a murder be a work of art? And the answer, of course, was, well, of course it could, but is it a good work of art? Anything can be a work of art, right? So I think we're in that sort of space there. With the tech, with the language models, I suppose it's going to be a bit like the world of text messaging, which was we didn't really see the application until people started showing us the application. I think we're at that stage. We've built the technology, that the real life applications are still to come, and the memes on Twitter are, just for fun at this stage. But I'd like to, I suppose, flip it around back to, and I frankly say the same thing every year. You turn up for a dose from me of the same message, which is technology essentially refracts and exacerbates the society that you live in. And so, if you look around, what's the state of the world today? It feels mildly dystopian. We're just post-semi-pandemic, on the verge of potential geopolitical kind of world-level conflicts, massive cost of living crisis, energy crises, etc. And I suppose ultimately the question is always, how are we going to use these technologies to help deal with some of these issues? Public services are rapidly failing in this country. So we don't just want these things to help us have a laugh on Twitter and to marginally improve our experience of particular kind of private service, leisure activities. It's got to be at the heart of making for a better society. And I suppose if I were to make one practical kind of proposal, which is a bit wider than the sort of language models themselves, is, the strength of UK civil society at the moment is pretty weak, given everything that we've been through, and their knowledge of this kind of technology is pretty weak. So how do we give them a role both in using the tools but also in influencing the development of the tools? Because I think they will ask a very different set of questions, even from some of the good people sat here today.
Thank you. I want to go online next. So Beth, if I could come to you, I'm interested in I suppose the extent to which, are you surprised at the pace some of these technologies have developed at, or are we very much in the place that we'd sort of been predicting over the last few years?
Sorry, I didn't successfully unmute myself there. I just wanted to make a few comments first, if it's okay, about my approach to this topic. As an anthropologist, I'm looking at people's reaction to this, and I take Hessen's suggestion that the conversation about sentience isn't everywhere when it comes to this new model, but it is there. People are exploring how to use this model to ask those questions. And I think it might be a good starting point to think about how slippery this term is that we're using already. That for some people, it moves very quickly between intelligence, sentience, consciousness, even really nebulous terms like the soul. And yes, I'm going to mention religion in a minute as well, because I think that's part of the conversation as well. But we're using them so interchangeably, but people have a very strong idea still that they'll know it when they see it. And that comes down in part to an emphasis on language in our definition of intelligence and these other terms. So when you get these large language models or AI chatbots that successfully hold conversations with people, we move very quickly into this personification or anthropomorphization of the AI. And we've seen this already. The larger conversation about sentience came about recently with the Google engineer Blake Lemoine talking about LaMDA and making claims for its sentience. And I think it's interesting to delve deeper into why we keep looking for this as well. And as an anthropologist, there's a couple of different answers that immediately sort of spring up. If you look at some of the work that people are doing specifically in the direction of exponential AI and people who are very keen on ideas about the singularity, some of this is about fear, that they want to know when sentience happens because they want to be able to deal with it. So when Elon Musk suggests that we all get involved with Neuralink and have chips put in our brains, he's actually talking about how he sees the future and humanity, how humanity is going to cope with that future of machines that take over everything. And that's a very strongly apocalyptic dystopian narrative, but it is driving, as with the example of Neuralink, some of the advances in the technology. Another reason why we look for these things is that we have a long history of interactions with non-human others that we've imagined. So things like angels, demons, aliens, fairies, monsters, these are all in our narratives already. We already have a large body of science fiction that tells us what machines that think might be like as well. I also threw this in as a question to the actual chatbot itself to see what it came up with, and it decided that we are obsessed with finding other sentient beings because of curiosity. But as this chatbot is a result of our data, it didn't actually reflect specifically on our search for AI sentience. It started asking about our search for extraterrestrial life. Again, these other modes of non-human others that we've talked about. And I said, specifically, I think religion has a part to play in this, because people are going to be drawing on their existing cultural context to make sense of this. And when Blake Lemoine made his claims about sentience, people were very quick to point out his own religious beliefs as he expressed them. And we're going to see people talking more and more about these larger philosophical questions from their cultural context and drawing on religious ideas. So in terms of your question, I just wanted to lay out some of that scene as I see it as an anthropologist, but we were expecting exponential growth in AI because of the techniques that are being used, and Adrian can probably speak more to this. But it's for my interest, the reaction that we're seeing already, people's willingness to respond to these kinds of large language models and these chatbots and engage with them and see what kinds of material that they can produce that they can use. So that kind of direct interaction is not something we've had as much so far. That a lot of these technologies have been more behind the scenes and we've imagined what they're like. And now we're seeing people directly engaging with them and creating things out of that interaction. So that's very interesting to me.
I have to admit, Beth, that as well as asking the chatbot what the correct way to load a dishwasher is, I did also find myself asking, is there life after death? So maybe there was something subconscious going on there about how I was interacting with this new kind of online phenomenon, or this new digital phenomenon. Adrian, I would like to come back to this point of around kind of the sort of pace, the pace of development, the pace of change, and what it means for us in terms of how we try and keep pace with it. Because for a lot of people, I think, particularly even in the last week, this feels like they'll feel like this has been a big shift. And whilst a lot of us in the room, knew these things were coming, others will be a bit taken aback by it. But can you tell us more about what you think about the kind of the nature of the pace of the pace of change and development, and what that means for us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, albeit remotely. The pace of change is really dramatic. I think people weren't really sure how good these kinds of large models would be a few years ago when things like the first generation GPT came out. People might know that this Chat GPT is a tweaked version of GPT 3.5. So there was a GPT and the GPT-2. When GPT-2 came out, people were astonished. Then GPT-3 came out, people were astonished again. And this version is a tweaked version of GPT 3.5. Basically, the kinds of capabilities which we're seeing, I think, are really dramatic. They are interesting. They make people wonder whether these algorithms are sentient. And whether, well, first I should say, I don't think they're sentient, and we can talk about that. And to prepare for that, I even went to, I trained up. I looked at the excellent source, Philosophy Stack Exchange, and so I'm prepared to discuss the issue. But basically, the rate of change, I think, is really rapid, and we should be thinking, where is this going to go in a few years from here? Because the capabilities have increased very dramatically in the last few years. You can see, if you ask questions, that it appears that these systems are able to do some basic reasoning. Now, they go wrong quite easily. So GPT-3 was famously tripped up by Douglas Hofstadter. Many of you may know, wrote that great book, Gödel, Bach, and he had an article in The Economist showing that you could quite easily fool it if you pushed it in just the right way. But this latest version is much harder to fool, and it says really quite sensible things. And I don't think the key thing is that it's right or wrong now. It clearly does not do things exactly correctly now. But I think it's important to keep track of the rate of change as you're identifying, because they're getting a lot better very quickly and in ways that are really hard for us to predict. So a few years ago, the early large models at that time were able to do things like add 1 and 1, and they would get 2 most of the time. If you ask them to add 5 and 3, they would get that wrong. But now they're getting that more correct, and they're doing all sorts of clever reasoning in ways that are convincing, and it's likely to keep getting better. It is an important issue that we don't have guarantees that are going to get these right. That's one of the big issues. But to pick up on one of the points that Heaton made, I think it's already at the stage where it's not just the toy, and we need to think about societal implications. Just as one example, you can use this current system to help you write computer code. And it's not guaranteed to be perfect, but I think it's likely that it will significantly increase productivity of computer coders. And that's a big deal for sort of accelerating all kinds of technological innovation. So I'd make that point. And if I may, I'm just going to quickly make the point about the sentience thing. I'm not an anthropologist like Beth, but I do think that we humans are a bit obsessed with sentience for good reason. We've evolved because it's been important for us. If I were to treat you in a way where I did not afford you the convention of being sentient, I would probably get in trouble with you quite quickly and might be killed. So we've evolved to see sentience all around us. We see ghosts. We see trees blowing in the wind, and we think, oh, maybe there's a sentience there. So we are kind of wired to see sentience. I'll leave aside the issue of whether these things really are or not, unless you really want to get into it. But my short answer to that would be that they're not yet. Interesting to think about what it would take.
I mean, that's a really interesting point, though, because you could potentially therefore have a situation where, even though they're not sentient, people really start to believe they are. Can I come back to you, Beth, on that one? Because that seems to have quite profound implications.
Yes, I mean, it really doesn't take anything particularly advanced to convince people of sentience. I mean, there's, the tests from way back in the 1950s, I think people were just doodles, animated doodles, how people assume personas for these different doodles. We don't need very much for, as I say, for humans to fail the Turing test. We do it all the time when we interact with bots online. People start flirting with Twitter bots. They just have a conception, as Adrian says, of a mind in another place. It doesn't take this advanced technology, but this advanced technology enhances that tendency. So the questions people are asking, and I see so many tweets people are sharing about the experiments they're doing with asking about, do you believe in God? Do you have a family? And this chatbot will reply. I just tried it today. It told me it has 2 sisters and 2 cats. I mean, where does that come from? I'm not suggesting sentience at all. It's in the data set, but it's only going to encourage people to see these as fully person, and that's problematic when the implementation of some of this technology could obscure the real responsibilities for the people behind the scenes, the corporations who are making decisions. And the whole conversation about AI rights and robot rights kind of derails that argument about regulation.
And that's not way off in the future, right? That's potentially now that you could have a situation where large numbers of people start to believe that there is sentience there and start to change their behaviors and so on accordingly. Ivana, from your perspective, how are you seeing all this?
I mean, it's interesting, and first of all, it's great to be surrounded by anthropologists, data scientists, philosophers. Beings. I mean, it's amazing. I've come to this from a more sort of legal/business perspective. And also, what has been interesting for me over the last couple of years has been looking at this from sort of wider angle and more international, in the sense that a company that I work for we have laboratories in India as much as in the US, in Silicon Valley. So it's been really interesting to look at all of this from a different perspective, how different people look at this and see this. And I think over the last few years, we've gone from, at the beginning, sort of AI is just about automation, to AI is going to solve the problem of the whole world, to AI is going to kill us all. And I think we have gone through this journey, and the what happened with the sentient, and I agree, you know, I think there is obviously a natural tendency to see sentience wherever it is. And I think people have warned us that that was going to happen, though, because I remember a few years back, then, you know, the ability of these systems to parrot, yeah, to mimic, to just replicate what humans were saying, it was brought to the fore. I mean, I remember it was a Google academic, a Google worker, Mitchell, bringing this to the fore years ago, saying, hey, look, be careful, because these, you know, they are parroting what you're saying, and this is dangerous for society. So these dangers have been brought to the fore, and I think I call the responsibility of organizations, politicians, and say, how do we deal with this? Because, I mean, the nature of us of seeing sentience wherever it is absolutely there. I wanted to say that I think this is interrogating us all in many different ways. It's interrogating us from a sort of legal debate in terms of, do we grant rights to machines or not? And I think there are we're widely discussing this across the globe with completely different approaches. It is interrogating us on profound issues like what is art, what is music, what is, you know, what is it my fear always in this sense is probably because I work on privacy and sort of I fear always that while I see this debate around sentience growing, and it is growing, I mean, it is growing because people want to, maybe they're interrogating themselves on what is the technological future, you know, what is going to happen in relation between me and the machine, you know, where does my humanity finishes, or actually, how do I define my humanity in this age? And I think my worry is always that it remains, which is that by focusing on this, we are going away from the issues that are here and now. For example, the issues around liability, which is, I know it's a nitty-gritty legal issue, but it's here and we've got to deal with it. I mean, there is a EU directive on liability, which is a really interesting one, causes is a little bit problematic on some elements, but that is there. And issues around sort of the use of data within the systems, you know, and I always feel that the debate and the push for sentience, the word that nobody knows what it is in reality, is going to take us away from these issues that are here now and we absolutely need to deal with.
Okay, so there is this big issue around how people perceive this technology, but your argument is that actually risks distracting us from the really detailed questions that we need to ask of these technologies.
I mean, sometimes I'm surprised by things that can happen. Like I saw somebody saying the other day, saying that they've trained the machine with the diaries, I don't know if you've seen it, on when they were a child. And they were, to an extent, talking to their inner child, you know, or talking to the child, you know, their own sort of themselves 20 years ago. And I'm thinking, when I looked at it, I'm thinking, can you imagine the value of this in therapy? You know, could it be from a psychological, you know, for psychotherapy, psychologists? I mean, and I'm normally like I like technology, but I'm normally quite risk adverse, you know, so I'm like, but I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking, can you imagine if we could do that and we could use this kind of stuff in therapy? So we're all interrogating ourselves, I think, about the potential of these technologies. The issue is what Ethan said, you know, how do we make sure that it goes for the good, you know, in a good sense? But something like that, I find it really fascinating that could happen, right? That we could actually use this in therapy, in this kind of settings. And I'm imagining that the potential use are vast of something like that. So I think what is fascinating about this is how we, from a sort of legal standpoint, psychological, I mean, we're all interrogating ourselves about all of this. The issue is how we make sure that we handle this discussion in a way which is responsible, and that is, I think, a little bit tricky right now.
So I want to explore this issue more about how we engage with these with these tools and these developments. But before we go there, I just wanted to come back to this kind of question. Is this a new era? Have we just entered a new era, or is this much more about a continuum And Adrian, from your perspective, do you feel like we've made we've moved into a new period, a new era with these kind of technologies, or as you said, it's just 3.5?
I'm always wary about saying we're into a new era. I think that some reasonable people might say yes, but I see it more as we have been advancing these technologies, and it seems as if the rate at which we're advancing is accelerating, and that's that's a big deal, and that can lead to significant changes quickly, particularly because with these models we're seeing emergent phenomena coming about that we weren't really sure would occur. So to some extent, we've taken models which we knew about, made them bigger, trained them on more data, and they're capable of doing things that we weren't sure they were going to be capable to do at all. And now there are additional bells and whistles that people are adding that are enabling to do the sorts of things that we're seeing with ChatGPT.
So not necessarily a new era, but certainly a sort of a further acceleration in terms of...
I think that's right. And another issue to keep in mind, which might lead some people to think that this is somewhat new, although again it's sort of a continuous thing, is that these models have elements that are somewhat general. So for a long time, machine learning models were trained on a particular data set on one very specific task, and they could get very good at that specific task, such as recognizing images or transcribing human speech. I should be careful not to use the word understand, or translating text from one language to another. But these models can do general things. They can write computer code, they can write an essay, they can make up a poem, they can tell you why a joke is funny, or they can try to. And that's a very wide range of abilities that makes some reasonable people wonder, will these models continue to get more and more general and powerful capabilities just by making them bigger and training on more data?
And Beth, do you agree with that, or does it feel like a new era to you?
So it's very hard to say you're in a new era when you're in a new era. Retrospectively, it's easier to do that. But one thing I would suggest is it's a new era for engaging with the world through a new user interface. So arguably, technology developments throughout history have shifted how we engage with the world. The printing press, automation of factories, everything changed our ability to interact with the world as it is. The development of technology that becomes an interface between the world and ourselves, like this form of artificial intelligence that we are seeking information and knowledge through it, could be seen as a new step change. The actual technology itself, I take Adrian's point about how it's developed and the growth of that, but actually if we're going to be doing more and more types of science and engagement with the world and engagement with each other through platforms that are AI enabled, that will shape what we can and can't see. I'm very interested in the effect of algorithms on social media and our attention, and how certain communities are either helped to develop or hindered in their development by choices that are inputted into algorithms. And similarly, we're seeing things like AlphaFold, which is leading us down different scientific routes that we might not have gone before. And this chatbot form as a way of engaging with the world. For instance, I checked out, who is Beth Singler on this chatbot, and it told me things that were reasonable but inaccurate. So it had things about I was doing things with the Turing Institute that sound reasonable, but I'm not. So it's about where our information is coming from, what kind of filters it passes through, and if people are increasingly wanting to use this as a user interface, it's going to have an effect on our ability to acquire knowledge.
Can I jump in on this? I mean, I think, you could have titled this session, "Are we obsessed with new eras?" as it were. Humans, that's another thing we like to do. But again, I'd say, let's not worry about that too much. The question is, what are the new challenges that are both near-term and kind of medium-term? And how do our institutions shift to cope, right? So take some practical, Beth's just given a few practical examples. Yeah, some more, now that these chatbots are being able to write pretty good essays, what are we going to do in terms of actually assessing people? It's a very kind of near-term problem that we are going to have to grapple with. Coming back to Adrian's point about this.
Are you grappling with it? Is anybody thinking about that?
Well, I think not yet, but I think quite quickly we're going to go back to paper-based exams, right? Yeah. Is probably the answer. I think Adrian's point about they make mistakes. Now, some of them were I was very pleased that they got the bat and ball problem wrong. You know, the one where it says the bat is £1 more than the ball, and the answer is £1.05 rather than a pound, and it gets it wrong in textual form. But it will figure that out very quickly, and it will learn. So that's fine. But there are definitely these questions of evidence, right? So on Stack Overflow, which is the website where coders exchange things with one another, it's being flooded with the wrong answers at the moment. It's literally been banned now. You can't put ChatGPT answers on there because people are banking the points. As Beth said, these look reasonably right. And so, therefore, we're going to have to say, how are we going to be able to check the quality of evidence? And then if you move into the art world and video, once we start deep faking, you know, you, Anthony, ripping the head off me on stage, you know, how are we going to be able to verify all of this? And, you know, we used to have those conversations about deep fakes a few years ago. That slightly died away. Actually, I think it's now getting much closer to that. And we're going to have verifiable norms of truth. And so when you start thinking about legal evidence, etc. So I think there's lots of norms, institutional questions, which crop up pretty fast.
And can I just say something? I mean, it's interesting because when the cars, you know, like cars started going the road, you know, it was very difficult to understand how traffic was going to be regulated. You know, cars were introduced in the road, 1850, what was it? And so there was some countries, including Britain, they had red flags, you know, before the cars saying, you know, there is an automated thing coming. And now we go better as a society to regulate traffic. So in an ideal world, you know, you would, you know, exactly what you were saying, we would understand how we're going to get around, you know, to understand and to work with these tools and to regulate them, right? But the reality is that it's not that simple. And it's not that simple because you cannot see all of this in isolation from wider issues. For example, competition. For example, the power of big technology companies within all this. It's very difficult to see this decoupled from that. So for example, one thing you could say, okay, as there was a red flag in front of a car, now we can have a red flag, which is every time the user interacted with the machine, there is a red flag that says, hey, this is not a human, this is a machine. Fine, we can do that. And that could be a very transparent, for as much transparency we can provide. And the debate about transparency has been so huge over the last few years in terms of meaningful transparency. So we could have all of that. However, the reality is that we are in a very sort of complicated from a competition perspective, from an antitrust perspective, and that is going to make this issue much more difficult, because what is happening at the moment is that you have large companies that are acting as regulators themselves because of the huge power that they have in the market. And this is why the priority, for example, in the US is very much on antitrust. This is why you have a lot of action being taken in Europe from the Digital Services and the Digital Markets Act to regulate and to curb all this. China, the same. You know, I really encourage everyone to look at China in terms of regulating algorithms, because it's really interesting. But so what I'm saying is that how can we actually decouple the discussions around this from discussions around sort of the way that our markets are functioning and the way the power of big tech and the transparency of big tech? I think this is an issue that it's very, you know, they're very much intertwined, these issues.
Yeah. Well, talk about technology accelerating. Time seems to have accelerated since we started this session. I can't quite believe that we're kind of almost out of time. So I have to open it up to the floor. Who's got a fantastic question to bring?
No pressure.
No pressure. To bring this session to a close. But and if we don't have a question, I'm going to go to each of the panelists and ask them for their kind of what's your most important takeaway for this moment with these new technologies? But let's take this question and then hang on, now I've got multiple hands.
Now it's a
So I'm going to go over there to the lady over there. Sorry, yeah.
Well, I've got the mic, so that won that
First
argument. I just wanted, just based on what we were talking, or what was being discussed just a moment ago about deep fakes and, you know, the red flag, you know, will this technology improve the situation we have around disinformation in the world, or will it exacerbate it? because it seems to have the potential to do both.
Very quickly, yes, no, why?
So, well, the early adopters of all new technologies are the porn industry and criminals, right? So I'm going to leave you to think about the porn industry yourself and what this might all do for that. But in terms of criminals, it's, disinformation is going to rise. And we've already had that problem in the last few years, and our institutions haven't managed to keep up. So I think we're in for a bit of a ride.
Yeah.
I mean, just today there was a report published by the Human Rights Watch on what happened in Hungary, where all the data that was collated for COVID vaccines and all the data was then used for Fidesz, for online manipulation and all of that. So I mean, that's not something that's going to go away.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a piece on Twitter today, similarly on. The productivity boost in terms of people producing malware.
Exactly.
It could be massive. Adrian.
Do you want, maybe do you want me to sum up?
This disinformation point, is it going to make the disinformation problem better or worse?
It is increasing the capability to make better deepfakes. I think that we've been worried about that for a few years. And as Eden said, it turns out that actually it hasn't been as big a problem as people feared, but at a certain level of capability, perhaps it might.
Okay, thank you. Right, I am going to ask us for closing remarks now. But so I'd like Beth. What's as we sit here at this moment, a week into ChatGPT, what's the most important takeaway for the people in the room today?
I think we just have to really reiterate that the more we get engaged in the conversation about sentience, the more we're distracted from the humans that are actually in these systems that are making the decisions about how they work, what kind of data is employed. We're already seeing people managing to unpack the data to find its biases in this chatbot. Again, we see this with almost every single implementation of a chatbot, Galactica as well recently. We need to be very, very aware of where humans are in the loop and not get too caught up in anthropomorphism. And as much as I love science fiction, we're not there yet. We should be very, very realistic.
Don't get distracted by sentience. Heaton.
Yeah, I mean, having been sort of quite, let's be quite literal and policy focused and so on, I suppose, and then notice, why are we finding this so fascinating? And it does feel like we're staring into the deep collective unconscious, because it's our own training data that's being reflected back. Now, it's full of biases and all those sorts of things, but when you plug in a command saying, do me a limerick in the style of Prince about why penguins, or whatever it might be, and it gives you something back. I mean, where has that come from? That's come from the kind of collective human unconscious, as it were. And I think there's something quite powerful and exciting about all of that.
Ivana?
Yeah, I mean, all what Beth said. But I think it's, I think there are pressing issues now that I think we've got a 5-10 year window to policy, from policy perspective, to regulate, not just regulate, but to govern more in general the way that we as humans are going to live with technology and I think in order to do that we can't be distracted and we have to put the basics right, especially around liability, privacy and security and all of that.
Thank you. And Adrian, bring us to a close.
Okay, I'll try. There are great opportunities, but there are very real concerns. The ones we've heard about, what data is being used, potential biases there, etc. I'd also add that there are huge compute needs in order to train these models. Not many institutes are able to do that, and this is likely to accelerate because it takes more and more each year. Ivana's point about regulation is really important, but actually it's really hard to figure out exactly what regulation we want. So I really encourage people to get involved, share your perspective, share your views, get involved, and let's together try and figure out how to do this well.
Thank you very much. You see, I told you we saved the best to last here at Tech UK. I think that's been a fantastically interesting, topical, and frankly timely discussion. If you'd like to join me in thanking all the panelists, thank you very much.